All right, good morning, Dad. Today is Friday, October 18th, and yesterday we just got confirmation that Yahya Sinwar was killed in Gaza. This is the current political leader, military leader of Hamas. How significant is his death? Do you think this has any impact on this conflict?
Well, yeah, it's significant. I don't know what kind of effect it'll have on the morale of Hamas fighters. I certainly, it's a loss that they're going to mourn, but I expect that they're going to continue fighting, and they've already selected a new leader. I can't remember his name. In general, I mean, what we've seen over the years, Israel has a long history of assassinating the leaders of its rivals, of its adversaries. And it really has never solved the problem for them. It never has. We can see what's happening. Hezbollah, of course, it wasn't just Nasrallah that was assassinated, but many Hezbollah leaders, and they are fighting very effectively there in southern Lebanon, at the border with Israel. So I expect that we're going to see the same thing. It's certainly a loss. He's mourned. He's considered a hero, and I think, properly so from their perspective. But the fight goes on.
Yeah, well, you can say that the Hamas and would view his death. He's a martyr now, and he was a hero, but he's also supposedly the mastermind behind the October 7th attack. Is that true? Do you know?
Well, I don't know. There's certainly a good chance of it. Being a leader of Hamas. It's funny he didn't really have a proper title, but he was a de facto leader of Hamas. I guess everybody agrees to that. But yeah, it would be very surprising if he didn't play a major role in planning and implementing that attack.
So, like you said, Israel has a history of going after these decapitation strikes. We've seen it just in this past year. They assassinated Hania, the Nasrallah, the IRCG brigadier generals in Damascus as well as in Lebanon, and now the latest one here with Yahya Sinwar. So it doesn't seem to have much of an effect. It almost seems to have the opposite desired effect. From a military strategical point of view, it seems to have kind of a rallying around the flag effect. It seems to strengthen the resolve of these movements and actually garner a lot of sort of sympathy from around the world in terms of just the global opinion about what's going on. So why would Israel continue to pursue this type of strategy if it's counterintuitive? I mean, it's not effective, right? I mean, it's counterproductive.
Yeah. Well, okay, I think there's one very cynical explanation, which I don't know if it applies in this particular case. Actually, I don't think it does so much. But in the cases, often it's that they want to avoid a negotiated settlement. And I think that's one reason that they killed Hania. And they actually killed a previous, several months earlier in Lebanon, they killed another Hamas lead negotiator. Because they actually don't want negotiations to succeed. That's one reason why they kill these leaders. In the case of Sinwar, that may be part of it. He was actually making noises about, trying to renew negotiations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think just like a week ago. He hadn't been heard from, and there was some talk that maybe he was dead, but he wasn't. He actually communicated his desire to revive the negotiations just about a week ago. So that maybe play into it, but I don't think so. In fact, this was not, to all appearances, and according to the statements of the IDF leadership, and I think we can believe in this case. This was sort of an accidental event. They just came across him. Biden claimed that he was killed because of U.S. intelligence. And I think that's nonsense. He was outside. He had been described as a coward. Cowering in the tunnels, and it's clearly not true. He was out there in the open, and Israeli soldiers came upon him and attacked him and ended up killing him and his bodyguards. And that's not the first time he was out in the open. I was just reading that there was I a journalist encountered him I believe, months ago, and just interviewed him out on the streets in Gaza.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this man, you can, whatever you think about him, but he was very courageous. He clearly was. I think anyway, going back to your question, I think the reason that the main motivation for killing him was revenge for October 7th. I think you don't really have to supply any other motive. There may be other motives, quite often by killing him, they also reduce the chance for negotiations, probably.
Right. I mean, from the Israeli point of view, I guess you could see it as a justifiable killing. Obviously, if he's the man that was behind October 7th, but the problem is that they just demolished all of Gaza in the process and killed all these people. Like if it was just a single.
I mean, if they had just done that. I don't think it would. It's not something that I would advocate, but it would be understandable. Just kind of in the terms of the logic of war and military conflict, it would be justifiable. You could see. But yeah, in the process, they simply destroyed Gaza and have made it pretty much uninhabitable. And we don't know how many dead Gazans there are. So there's just nothing to celebrate here. I find the statements by Western leaders just to be disgusting. They celebrate this. This is a victory for humanity. He's described as a terrorist, a coward, and he was neither of those things. I just find it vile. You don't forget, it was just less than a week ago that there was that horrible attack on the hospital. We just saw that he was the man who was fighting the people who was doing that, and he was fighting bravely. You should say, whatever you think, maybe you think it's just revenge for October 7th. You should at least acknowledge his bravery and his humanity. And none of the Western leaders did that.
What about leaders like from Russia or China, these other global powers that aren't, Islamic powers that aren't part of the Middle East? What's been the global response to it?
Actually, I don't know. Frankly, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, because obviously you think that within the Middle East you would have a lot, but we are seeing this power shift where it seems like India, Russia, and China are all becoming more sympathetic towards Iran and just the axis of resistance in general. So, how Israel goes after the political leaders and military leaders like this, is this something that we have historical precedents for, that you just go for these assassinations and decapitation strikes? Because it doesn't seem to follow the normal rules of war in any way. And somehow whenever we do it, we just celebrate it here in the West. We're like, yeah, so good, we did it. But at the same time, it's like, aren't assassinations kind of gross? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like they're not.
They're dirty. They're cowardly. I think it's actually in general it's something that you don't do. You don't go after the leader of your adversary. If you do, one thing is that you open up the door to the possibility that your adversary will go after you, right? Go after your leadership. I guess, I think there are a couple things going on here. It's just a sense of impunity that the West and Israel have. They're much more powerful than their rivals, or have been, up to maybe until very recently. We may see that finally changing. So they just simply can do what they want. They don't have to worry about the consequences. So they don't really have to observe the etiquette of war. I mean, and in general, you just don't do that. You don't try to kill the leader of your adversary, but they can do it, and they don't have to worry about the consequences. And then then it's also just this ideological ideology of supremacy. Again, that they're terrorists. It's just an extension of that of regarding all of your adversaries as somehow not being fully human, and you're as we said recently, you're the civilized ones, you're the victims, so whatever you do is justified. Again, this is just another example of that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Just, I see all these posts online just saying how Israel's making the world a safer place by eliminating all these terrorists. And a lot of people just don't think much beyond that. They just say, like, okay, the label terrorist is given on them, then clearly we're the good
now
guys.
We can do whatever we want
guys.
to them. Right.
Right. Well, shortly after the assassination, or I should say the killing of Sinwar, the Hezbollah announced that they are escalating to a new phase of the war, that they're moving up. So do you think this is first of all, is this true? And is this a direct response to the killing of Yahya Sinwar?
Well, I don't think they, at least, I saw that report too. I saw that report a couple of times, and it didn't actually specify the killing of Sinwar. So we don't know. It may have been that this was planned, that they had decided a few days earlier that they were going to enter this new phase, and they just made the announcement, and then coincidentally, the announcement was made around the time of his death. It seems to me that if it was in response to it, that would be, would be clearly stated. It would be part of the announcement.
Do you have any speculation on what an escalation would mean from Hezbollah?
Well, we've always wondered about their missile arsenal. I mean, they've fired lots of rockets and missiles. They clearly have a lot of them, and they have done some damage to Israel. Again, we don't know how much, I think, because of military censorship. Especially they've been using these rockets to strike troop concentrations, assembly points close to the border. And, I'm sure they've done some damage. Maybe they've killed quite a few soldiers. We just don't know because Israel's not talking about that. But yeah, there's a sense that they have more, that they have more sophisticated missiles that they haven't used yet. And maybe those are going to come out now. Again, that's purely speculation on my part. I don't know if they have those missiles or not, but perhaps we'll see them now. Maybe there's just going to be an uptick in tempo. One thing I noticed that, recently there have been raids actually into Israel by Hezbollah. Maybe that's what they're talking about. Maybe it's a combination of the two.
So how is it going for the IDF in southern Lebanon so far?
Yeah, it's hard to know. We get reports from Hezbollah, and they describe, all kinds of ambushes, destruction of tanks, casualties. I think they say this was maybe a couple days ago, that 55 IDF soldiers have been killed in battles. I think the IDF has acknowledged at this point something like 20. Which is not a huge number, but it's not insignificant.
Yeah, it seems like nothing, to be honest, though. I mean, these numbers are so small, especially when we talk about what's happening in Ukraine, where we...
Right.
I mean, I'm just hearing over 20,000 Ukrainians died in Kursk so far already. That's just Kursk alone.
Yeah.
And then, they're
maybe
losing something like 2,000
killed and seriously wounded. I think that's what that's... Right. Yeah, well, the numbers are just a lot larger. I mean, we're talking about much bigger countries, a much broader front in Ukraine. So I think that's a big part of it. These are fierce battles, but they're pretty small. We're talking about, rather than, or more than skirmishes. They're real battles, but instead of, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of soldiers on one side and hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the other side across a approximately 1,000-mile front. We're talking about hundreds of soldiers on each side, across a much smaller front. So the battles are fierce, but we're just not going to see the same kind of numbers. But then, the thing to remember, too, is that I think Israel has a much lower tolerance for casualties. That's what's happened in the past. They came and they invaded Lebanon twice prior to this most recent invasion. And in the end, they killed, I think, many more Lebanese soldiers, Hezbollah soldiers, than they themselves suffered. There were many fewer IDF soldiers killed in these conflicts, but it was more than Israel was willing to bear, and they pulled out. It's like the home front, the population that's been supporting the genocide in Gaza. Yeah, there have been casualties, but it's something that they can stomach. It's been an easy fight for them. It's generally, pulverizing buildings from the air, and fighting really very lightly armed and minimally trained guerrillas in Gaza. But here it's something different. Again, they're up against a very, very well-trained, very experienced army that's prepared well and is well supplied with arms. And they're going to suffer more casualties. There's no question about it. And I don't think the Israelis have shown in the past they don't really have a stomach for that, for a real fight. Even if they have the upper hand, in the end, it's just not popular. It's no fun.
Right,
I shouldn't use that word, but that's kind of how it's. It's like the others. A lot of these other fights are like video games. This is not a video game.
Right, you're just operating your drone or whatever from a battle station somewhere and just pushing buttons. It doesn't feel so real. But once you're there and bullets are whizzing by, and people are dying around you, I'm sure the mood changes rapidly. So how big is the IDF army to begin with? Well, if you say they have a low tolerance, but then it seems very reckless to go for this fight. I mean, obviously they're going to have to build up a tolerance quick. I mean, this is turning into I think fair to say kind of a fight for Israeli existence. I think when this is all said and done, Israel either won't be around anymore or it will be a completely different Israel, right? Yeah. Do you think that's fair to say?
Well, again, they may, they may win, and it won't be a real win. It will be a Pyrrhic victory. I mean, they could end up achieving some kind of success against Hezbollah. It's not going to be a total success. They're not going to destroy Hezbollah. Hezbollah will remain, and I think almost certainly they're going to end up having to pull out. So, but they can do a lot of damage to Hezbollah. Maybe to the point, Hezbollah will just end up firing all the rockets, missiles that they have, and they don't have anything more. And then, I don't know if that's really possible. Yeah, because they can make them. Apparently, they have the components and they're continually assembling new ones. So they can do a lot of damage to them, let's just say. And maybe they can do a terrific amount of damage to Iran to the point that I don't know. I don't really see it. But let's just say, just for argument's sake, that they had achieved some kind of victory. It would be a very ugly victory. But the Israel that would that would exist after that so-called victory, which I can't really conceive of, but let's say it happens. Sometimes there are things that you can't conceive of, and they happen. The history is full of surprises. It will be a very damaged Israel. Its reputation is already in tatters. I think it's right to say it's the most hated country in the world, hated by the UN itself, and it's only going to be worse. And it will have its economy will never recover from this. I don't think so. It's already very bad, but it'll only get worse. That whatever happens, there's going to be damage to its infrastructure, no question about it. Damage to its reputation, which is very important to it. That aura of invincibility will be gone, and damage to the very notion of Israel. This was a place. This was supposed to be like a bit of Europe in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that's going to be gone. And there was a sense of prior to October 7th, that the conflicts were over, that Israel basically had won, and that's going to be gone, and that's going to have real consequences for investors and for potential immigrants and so on and so forth. I mean, people are leaving Israel. They're going to continue to leave Israel. Immigration to Israel, I imagine, is going to almost cease. Only the crazies will go there. Investment will cease to flow into Israel. It's going to start, I imagine, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Israeli companies, large corporations there, are actually looking for a way out. It's going to be a very damaged Israel, even if there is some kind of victory at the end.
Okay, so just to be clear, that was your rosy best case scenario for Israel, right? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I don't see it's already really bad for Israel. They've already severely and I think permanently hurt themselves, and the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be for them.
Okay, well, if that's the best case scenario, what's the worst case scenario? What are we looking
Well,
at?
the worst, the worst case scenario. Well, one is, Israel goes nuclear. They find that their backs against the wall, or they feel truly threatened. Again, I think Israel, its threshold for an existential threat is probably a lot lower than it is for other countries. And they, at some point in the conflict, again, let's say if the missile exchanges, the air war between Iran and Israel, it does not go well. It's going very badly for Israel. They may just choose to go nuclear. They may choose to use at least one tactical nuclear weapon. That could happen. And again, that would, maybe they would achieve some kind of victory that way. Perhaps, Iran would just call it off at that point. Say we don't want our a radioactive wasteland here. That could happen. But again, it would be at even greater cost to Israel's reputation. I think there would be severe sanctions placed on Israel. We're actually starting to see a movement to sanction Israel finally within Europe. The U.S. and the U.K. are still solidly in the Israeli camp, but there is Macron has stuck by his guns. I don't know how significant it is because they haven't provided many arms, but Meloni made an even stronger statement, which is surprising because she's somebody who's a figure on the right, and I think that's very encouraging. We need more conservative figures within Europe standing up to Israel, and she did. And I think she actually just made it crystal clear they're just not going to get another bullet from us. Now again, I don't know if that's really very significant to Israel, but it's symbolically significant, and it's it indicates, it's reflective of a trend that should be very worrying for Israel. So let's say if they actually did go nuclear at some point, I think there would be severe economic sanctions even from the Europeans.
Right. I mean, the sanctions that are being talked about right now that Macron's opposed from Meloni, these are just armed sanctions, right? I mean, really,
right.
At the end of the day, it's the U.S. that supplies all the military aid.
Right.
So
95% or something like that. Right. Very high percentage.
Right. So France, and it's a symbolic gesture. It's nice to see, but really, it doesn't really matter as long as the U.S. is the one that's pumping Israel full of military equipment.
That's the way Israel is thinking. Again, I think it's very reckless. They're skating on thin ice. These are rumblings. Nothing much has happened. Like the volcano hasn't erupted yet, but there's rumblings of a real disaster coming from Israel. Even if they do manage some kind of win, it's just that they may actually face real, severe, real sanctions for once from European countries. We're not there yet. Yeah, but we would never have heard these kind of statements from Meloni or Macron or other people, other leaders within the West before.
Right. And just talking about sanctions, it doesn't make sense to me that the world isn't standing up and putting real economic sanctions. We're not just talking about, arms embargoes on Israel. I mean, you told me, and we looked it up after it's confirmed that, the U.S. and the collective West have sanctioned 1/3 of the countries in the world. 1 out of 3 countries in the world have been sanctioned by the U.S. And it's just because for the most trivial reasons, you look at the U.S. wrong, then the U.S. sanctions you. So we're so ready to sanction everybody. So there's a precedent, right? There's this precedent that that you can sanction somebody, because we're like, you like Pepsi and we're for Coke, we'll sanction you, whatever. That's a terrible example, but you know what I mean. But we say so why I don't understand why countries, for example, like Turkey, an Islamic country that is obviously the population, 99% of the people in Turkey are behind the Palestinians, right? That they are they see them as brothers in arms and suffering. Yet Turkey continues to let oil flow into Israel. Why can't they just stand? Because it would be popular. I mean, we're sanctioning people left and right. Why can't other countries have the gumption to stand up? Because it would be well received. I think it would be a smart political move. And I don't think it would really damage Turkey that much economically. It's not like that oil disappears.
Yeah.
You would take a hit, sell it to some other country. It just...
Right. Well, I'll tell you, the oil is this kind of a more difficult issue. I looked into it a bit more. The oil, of course, doesn't come from Turkey. It comes from Azerbaijan. And so one thing is just that Turkey can't simply shut it down without getting some sort of agreement from Azerbaijan ahead of time, because it's not just Israel that would suffer a loss, but Azerbaijan would as well. And I think they're not willing to do it. Now, Azerbaijan, I think, is a nominally Muslim country, but they've actually been very close to Israel. I think Israel has supplied them with a lot of arms and other military support.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
So that's part of what's going on. Turkey has too. I mean, they're all together there in Azerbaijan. Now, but other economic sanctions are certainly could be imposed, by Turkey on Israel. There's no question about it. Mm-hmm. And it's just that, we've talked about Erdogan he's a snake. He gives those fiery speeches. He's been doing it all along, and he does it to appeal to his base because he knows how strong the feeling, the sentiments against Israel and for the Palestinians are in his country. He knows it. But he has his secret deals, and who knows, family members and whatever, and so he says one thing and he does another. But there may be a time when he just sees the writings on the wall, and that the anger against Israel is just too great. And then, even if his son's going to lose out on this deal or whatever, he's just like, okay, we got to cut this out. We may find that'll happen. And certainly if Israel went nuclear or whatever, I think, I would think, before then, at some point, we may see some economic sanctions from Turkey.
Yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me because, you say that Israel has lost the PR war completely. They're the most hated country on the planet now. But yet nobody's doing anything about it.
Yeah.
The only countries...
the problem is that they have the rules-based, international order behind them. It's basically the U.S. and its vassals.
Right. So, but that's a small part of the world now.
Yeah, but it's a very powerful. It's a very powerful part of the world, and those are the people that impose sanctions. I think sanctions should be used in only the most extreme circumstances. But these are the extreme circumstances.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, we've sanctioned a third of the world for no reason whatsoever. Yeah. And here we have a genocide going on in Gaza. Even if you don't want
the U.S. government just will not acknowledge that. And it's just no matter what.
The U.S. government won't, but the rest of the world is. Even if you don't use the term genocide, mass murder, you just want the killing to stop. So,
I think what we're saying is like, this is the old order is still there. Right, it's the so-called rules-based, international order. It's there. What we're saying is Western hegemony. It's still very powerful, and a lot of countries that are now beginning to turn away from the U.S. or at least try to adopt a neutral position where they used to be firmly in the Western camp. They still, these old habits die hard. They still kind of just like we say. Even with all the huge debt and so on in the U.S., there's still this habit, this instinct that we go to the U.S. dollar, whenever economic uncertainty exists. It's supposed to. It just has that aura of safety around it. And the U.S., even though countries are starting to see that, hey, there's some problems here, I better start to hedge my bets, they still tend to look to the West for leadership. But I think that's just that's part of what we're observing here. And that's why these wars are so important. These wars are bringing that to an end. There already have been very important shifts, but that old order hasn't collapsed yet. It's still very, very powerful. That Western hegemony is still there, but it is in the process of collapsing. I believe that very strongly. And when we see, sanctions imposed, against U.S. and Western wishes, that will be a sign that it really is, that the end is near, let's say. But we're not quite there yet.
It just seems it's hard for me to just fathom how the whole world can be against Israel here, and they want this. Everybody wants this to end. Everybody sees where this is heading. This is heading into a wide regional world. Even if you're pro-Israel, you should be able to see that this is not good for Israel. You wanted to paint that rosy picture where you have a damaged Israel, but Israel's still intact. Well, maybe the best way to do it is to sanction them, so they cut them off, so they can't keep this war going because they are destroying themselves in the process. Like, anyway, we talk about this all the time, right? I mean, every time we look at it, it doesn't end well for Israel. Any way you cut it or look at it. So, the quicker that we can just stop the killing, the better for everybody. Israel, better for the region. And so I just don't see why more people won't stand up and try to sanction them. I mean, the only people that are standing up are the Houthis and Iran,
Right.
That's it.
Right.
It's
Hezbollah.
And Hezbollah, right? That's it.
Right.
And Hezbollah is not even a state. Hezbollah is an organization, so it's like a
the Houthis really aren't a state either. They're not. They're kind of a similar kind of organization. Yeah.
I heard that we just bombed Yemen the other day, and I heard from Alexander Mercouris that they reused some kind of like B-52 stealth bomber.
B-2. The B-52s are the old one. B-2.
Those are my World War II book days. Yeah, the B-52.
Yeah. I think the B-52s are still around. It's quite amazing, but they're not the new ones. Yeah, the B-2s are the new ones. That has not been confirmed. I think it was actually the report appeared in Israeli media. I think, like as Alexander Mercouris pointed out, that would be rather bizarre because, I mean, it's the B-2. It was a bomber designed to deal with, let's say, the Soviet, now Russia, to deal with peer adversaries, with countries that have very advanced air defense systems. That's why you use a stealth bomber. You don't use a stealth bomber you would think, unless there's something that I don't understand about this, to attack Yemen that has virtually no air defenses. So who knows what that's, he speculated that it may have been, or passed on somebody else's speculation that it may have been some sort of just signal to Iran, hey, we've got B-2s here, you better watch it. And that's possible, but we don't even know if it happened.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't think about, stealth bombers. We don't... See, this is the thing I realized is that we don't really know what countries are capable of until it actually happens.
Right.
We've just been in this... We've just been talking so long, like, yeah, America can do all this stuff and do everything, and nobody was really aware of the capabilities of Russia or North Korea or Iran. And now it's starting to unravel, but most people haven't really caught on because they're not paying as close attention as we are. Like, I didn't even know about hypersonic missiles until, a couple of years ago when we were talking about it and learning it about this war, and then realizing that the United States doesn't have these things, and then learning about air defenses and drones, that we are in this new modern warfare, and we have to recalibrate military power around the globe. And most people aren't able to make that calculation because they're not spending the time looking at it and realizing, like, hey, the dollar value doesn't mean that much. Tanks don't mean that much. Helicopters really don't mean that much. It's like who can pump out drones, who can pump out air defense interceptors, who can develop hypersonic missiles and evade them. That's kind of the new game.
Right. Well, you can remember, there are all kinds of weapons that were introduced to the Ukraine battlefield, with a great deal of fanfare. And one after another, they've fizzled out and they've proved to be duds, right? We've talked, at first it was HIMARS, it was the Javelin anti-tank missiles, it was the small diameter guided bombs, it was, now ATACMS, it's one thing after another. And also there were these Predator drones that actually Turkey supplied in great number that were they had proved to be very effective in the Armenia-Azerbaijan war, but they were just absolutely useless because they were up against a very sophisticated air defense system, so they were just immediately shot out of the sky. They didn't do anything. But that's just one of many examples. One thing after another is fizzled in Ukraine. And again, a lot of these were introduced with a great deal of confidence. So yeah, who knows? Like the B-2 bomber, just well, it was developed decades ago, and technology has progressed. I'm sure that the Russians have figured out a way to detect it. They just may be as obvious as daylight to them when it flies in, over their air defense systems, and they might find it very easy to shoot down. I can't know for sure, but that I wouldn't be at all confident that it's really all that effective. And maybe, the Russians have supplied and the Iranians themselves have developed, ways of detecting these so-called stealth aircraft.
Right. Yeah, we just really don't know. But everything we've seen is that actually the U.S. has come up wildly short in our sort of touted capability against Russia, and Iran is by association with Russia is sharing that technology. And I was just thinking the other day as well. We were talking a lot about the THAAD system, and there's a lot of chatter about it and it being deployed there to tripwire or whatever. But I was just thinking it just makes no sense for America to send a THAAD interceptor here. This is a new weapon, very, very expensive, something touted, maybe one, supposed maybe kind of a jewel of our military industrial complex, something we can show off at expos and make a lot of money selling them, because they sure cost well over $1 billion for the system. And you said each interceptor costs $12.6 million. And it's like, you should, now we will send the system there. And we know that we don't have the interceptors there to really stop a volley. There's maybe something 40 interceptors there.
Yeah, 48, I think.
50 or 50, 48,
but you can't.
Yeah.
The thing is, you can't fire them all at once. They have a certain number of launchers. I don't know how many they can fire at a time.
So the only reason that if I was in charge of the military industrial complex, the only time that I would want to put a system into play is if I know with a high degree of certainty that it's going to perform well, because this is my sales pitch to the world for the military industrial complex. Watch this new fancy system. Iran's going to launch 100 missiles. Boom, 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 boom. We shoot them all out of the sky. Great.
Right.
Then it's a huge victory for you and that system. Instead, what it's going to do the exact opposite. You supply this huge system and it's going to do nothing. And people are like, I don't want to buy this thing. It's clearly worthless. The Houthis can get by it. Why would I spend, $10 billion on that equipment, if it doesn't work? Yeah. And I was
the thing is, we just don't know. Yeah, like you, I'm very skeptical. I don't think it will work, but we just don't know. It's been untested in combat conditions. That's the thing.
Supposedly it has. Supposedly, I was trying to do some research. Take it with a grain of salt. I talk to ChatGPT way too much, and sometimes it just tells me bogus stuff. But it does seem to be true that there was an incident in 2020. I think was it 2022? I forget. Maybe earlier. That where the Houthis launched an attack at Saudi Arabia, and they had a THAAD system, and it intercepted one ballistic missile. Only one, from what I understand, confirmed.
Okay.
And it was a mixed volley that the Houthis launched of cruise missiles, drones, and a few ballistic missiles, and it only took out one ballistic missile. So I think that's not really a success, because it said that there was actually damage and there were casualties, that the Houthis were successful in their strike. So we're talking about a small barrage, and this THAAD thing didn't do it.
I seem to remember something about that. I know the Patriots also failed miserably at that time, and the Saudis were really angry about that. They had spent so much on the Patriots, and these drones got by it. Said, "Whoa, we didn't design it for drones,"
Yeah. So what did you design it? And also, something I did learn about. I think you probably learned it from Alexander McCurse as well. It's just like the Russian air defense system, the S-300, S-400. We use these names as if they're a single model. But apparently how it works is that they're all different types of, it's a huge, massive network of integrated systems with different missiles and interceptors for different things. So this system is capable for, parts of it are designed for shooting down aircraft. Other ones are ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, whatever. It's a complete kind of system that evolves over time. It's a continually upgraded system.
And some,
ours...
Some S-300s were developed way back in the 80s. But others much more recently. So some of them are really quite sophisticated, and even the older ones really were quite good. Ukraine has proven that.
Right. What I heard is actually the S-300. You can use that term, but like the S-300 systems in Iran, for example, are being upgraded. So it's like it's not kind of one thing like, okay, you toss out your new iPhone and get a new one. No, it's like they're getting new missile updates, components, plug and play kind of things, and continual updates. So that S-300 system is not all 80s tech. It's
right, absolutely. Yeah,
right.
Some of it is quite recent. There's some question. There was reports that the Russians had supplied S-400s to Iran, and then later reports denied this. So we don't know, but it might not really matter. Like you say, it's just sort of that's just semantics. It's just a different label. But the S-300 system, especially if upgraded, may be more than sufficient.
Mm. Yeah, it just everything that the U.S. is doing. If you are pro-U.S., U.S. might and military dominance, whatever. It's just the decisions we make are just so poor. If you want to even keep that illusion of military strength, the way we're doing it is so bad. Like piecemealing little bits of equipment to Ukraine for the Russians to learn how to dismantle them and counter them. And now we're doing the same thing with the THAAD system. It's not going to do like the MIC's in trouble, right? Who's going to buy military equipment now from the U.S.
I guess the problem is they
so
don't,
much and it doesn't work?
I think if the MIC had their druthers, if they could make the decision, I don't think that THAAD would have gone to Israel. I think it was a political decision. We've speculated about whether it's supposed to be a tripwire or something similar, but it may be just something. I think probably the most likely explanation is the most obvious and stupid explanation, and it's just that it's domestic politics, and the Biden-Harris administration wants to show its commitment to Israel. So they just announced with a great deal of fanfare that we're sending them the best, air defense missile system in the world, and the THAAD. And this is supposed to show our rock-solid support for Israel. I think that's the most likely, just upon reflection, the most likely explanation.
You think someone would tell them, like, hey, maybe
they don't
might
listen,
not get the...
Yeah,
it's not going to get the job done, and it's going to look bad for America.
Yeah, but it's just, I think we just see this again and again. The civilians, I think it's the military people. Most of them are waking up. Not the British military. They seem to have the dumbest defense secretaries in the world. There's this guy, what's his Lummy, and the one who preceded him, Ben Hodges. These guys seem to really, don't seem to even understand what they have and what's. You'll get I think, better grasp of reality from our podcast or a number of other podcasts than you'll get from listening to these guys. They just inhabit a completely delusional world. But it's the world that a lot of civilian leaders still inhabit. They're still living in the unipolar moment. They're still living. It's part of the kind of the remnants. I guess it's not quite to remnants, but it's reflective of Western hegemony. They don't understand that Western hegemony has been challenged. They're still living in the world where it's unchallenged, and they just really can't drop that mindset. Even when people start showing them statistics or whatever, it's just like, there must be some explanation for that because we're the West, we're number one.
Right. Yeah, I think our military leaders are not really military leaders; they're politicians. That's the problem.
Oh yeah, very few of them. They just, the people that rise to the top here just seem to be they're just kind of PR guys. They just don't seem to have any substance. These people are not at all impressive. Macron is somebody who actually I think understands some things. If occasionally something comes out of his mouth, it shows that he kind of grasps reality. But in the end, he's just a creature of that same establishment, and he's not somebody that is really ever going to go out on a limb to fight that establishment. So if they're not stupid, they're spineless.
Here's a question that's kind of a little bit out of left field, but I was just thinking about the other day. Maybe it's a dumb question, but all these wars that are in the Middle East, it seems like a lot of them, the Middle East policy for the United States has been dictated by Israel, and that's why we get involved in these conflicts. But then was always this talk about getting the natural resources of the Middle East to obtain oil. How much of that is true? Do you think that we are incentivized to go into, when we went into Iraq or the Persian Gulf War or Afghanistan? Was it to control natural resources? Because I don't think it really affected. When I heard about that, I remember in school when I was a little kid, I was like, okay, well, gas is going to get super cheap, but I never really saw any difference, for us. So is there any truth to that we're holding this as collateral or whatever?
Again, there was a lot of talk about that. In the end, we benefited very little. I mean, certain, like Halliburton, right? Politically connected corporations in the U.S. certainly benefited. But it wasn't that we actually got the oil and it really made any difference in a significant way to the U.S. economy. I almost wish it were true, because that would show some kind of rationality. Yes, it would be evil, or it'd be very self-interested and detrimental to the global good, but it would be intelligent, right? It would show that you can kind of deal with a self-interested entity, a rational actor, and but that's unfortunately not what we have. We have ideologues, in charge, and if you want to look for the reason for the Iraq War, you go to the neocons, and if you want to look for a reason for U.S. participation in maybe in a war with Iran, again, you look at Zionism and you look at the neocons, and these are ideologues that we're talking about. That's the unfortunate thing. We're dealing with irrational actors.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. It's like, surely there has to be something that America gets out of this, right? There has to be something that we're doing out of our own self-interest, even if you say it's evil. I mean, just like in the old days, Vikings would go over to Scotland or whatever and raid and pillage and, destroy. But at least you understand that they were doing it because they were taking something. They were taking resources and bringing it back. I mean, it was barbaric, but we're doing it. And we're not even taking anything back. It's like we're just spending money. We're just wasting our resources and getting nothing out of it. Like, I mean, you get
not
people right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. That's right. It's an empire that, again, is not to our benefit. You get some people on the left. It seems like I used to hear this more often than I do now. I think this kind of viewpoint is dying, but it's still there. It's very, you find it quite frequently on the left, that it is somehow all about economics and this empire is, to our benefit. And I listen to their arguments, but I've never found them at all convincing. I think what you can say is that is like a lot of these wars can be to the benefit of, certain corporations, and they clearly do, work to support wars, but they don't even care what kind of war it is. Like if you decide today, I'll give you one example. Dick Cheney, he's, we think of him as like Mr. Neocon now, but he used to be, he went in and out of government, and I think he was actually associated with Halliburton, outside of government. And at that time, he was working to actually make peace with Iran because they had, a chance to for some huge oil contracts. And then he changed hats, and then he was all for bombing Iran. I think in the end, those kind of people, they don't care. The ones that are truly self-interested, the corporations. I mean, if you want to make peace with Iran, great, and let's go bomb Saudi Arabia. Or, it's just like, in the end, it really doesn't make any difference to them. They're not the ones that are setting policy, but they leech onto the policy and they see, oh, that's the way we're going. Yeah, let's support that because wars are good for us. But yeah, it's the ideologues. The policy that we have is really very much against our own interests. Even just looking at it, however you want to look at it, making enemies of Russia and China and Iran all at the same time it should be to nobody's surprise that that's brought them together and actually severely weakened our position. But these people are just in the grips of this, this vision of hegemonic, supremacy, and again, they're neocons who want to export the revolutions. They just don't give a damn about the nitty gritty reality. They're always on the attack.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it was having this military going around the world, and we were was to our benefit, we wouldn't be $35 trillion in debt, right? I mean,
Right.
it's a big part of our debt is because of the military expenditure, and we're not getting anything back from it.
Right. You
And
actually,
so,
like, you get that, okay, let's say that self-interested, rather ugly imperialist kind of talk from Trump. Like, he actually said it's great that we're just seizing the oil from Syria. Actually, in the end, we didn't even get it, but, I guess like Turkey's getting it. And, but yeah, that's thuggish kind of talk, but it's not neocon talk that you get from him. In the end, but if he actually was in charge and he could have, and he had the truly in charge, meaning that like he's not just, I think he was in a lot of ways just a figurehead in the last time he was president. But if he had, if there was a whole real Trump revolution within government and they implemented his vision, that's the kind of world that we would see. We would actually be trying to seize resources and without regard. We'd probably make a deal with Russia and who knows, turn around, make a deal with Iran or something because we'd see it was to our benefit and then go attack, Saudi Arabia and seize their oil. It's just, I'm just making this all up, but it'd just be, he's not an ideologue, whatever you can say about him. He's not an ideologue the way the neocons are. And, when he talks about, he just talks, he believes in American power and American wealth. And, he really doesn't care how we go about it, how we go about getting there.
right. Yeah. How do you think, we've sold it to the American people that somehow having this huge military and all these military bases around the world is good for America? I mean, I feel like you don't have to go that far to have it unravel and see like, hey, this isn't beneficial. And we are seeing some of that with the America First movement,
Right.
but
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
but how did, I mean, they're all Zionists, but there are at least some push to, say like, hey, let's bring things back home and keep things a little bit more closer to home.
Right.
So how do they? Is it just built off of the legacy of World War II, and we've just been carrying that for so long, and the collapse of the Soviet Union?
I think in a lot of ways we're still living in that world. It's just like, I've talked about the unipolar moment in the 90s to explain our behavior vis-a-vis Russia. Like, we can't let that go. But I think in a larger sense, when we talk about the U.S. relationship with the rest of the world, we're still living in 1945 in the years that ensued, and it's something that we can't let go. We were the guys in the white hats to save the world, and it's that's why. And so we still get a great deal of reverence to the U.S. military. Now that's starting to decline. Because a lot of the woke policies and something, we've talked about that, but it's still there. There's still this residual respect and belief in the U.S. military. It's not nearly as strong as it used to be, but it's still a powerful force.
Okay. Well, let's see. Maybe eventually. It's changing. These things are all changing, but I'm always surprised about how slow it takes things to change.
Yeah, no, it's true.
It's just that,
that's right. I mean, there's always things have actually already changed, and that's what we're talking about. They really have already changed in a really big way. Things are very different now than they were just a couple of years ago. Especially a watershed event was. The launch of the SMO and the Western reaction to it, and that's already changed the world. But they have been changing since, rapidly over the last several years, and and at maybe the slower pace over the last couple of decades. We're in a completely different world right now, but the world, the consciousness actually tends to lag. People have these very deeply ingrained ideas about who the good people are and who the bad people are, who's strong and who's weak and whatever. And those things can be sometimes easily 20 years out of date, even more. You still find that with Russia. I think it's that's just one example and one that we talk about a lot. I talk to people and I realize that a lot of them still think that Russia is the Russia of the 1990s or the early 2000s. and it's not. It's just a completely different country. But you would hear, people that are supposedly well informed, describing Russia as a third world country or something, and they still have this impression. And our media and our press secretaries and spokesmen and so forth, they all take advantage of that. So, whenever they can, because they know that there is that lingering impression, and they just kind of work on it, and then they're constantly denigrating Russia. But it's just for people who actually bother to study these matters, or who go to these countries,
Right.
You just know it's not true. It's just completely, so very, very far from the truth. But it's just, this is what always happens. Again, it's just like the consciousness actually lags behind the reality. And so there, normally, sometimes at some point there's some sort of event that's so huge that it just cannot be ignored. And people wake up and say, my God, what's happened? And it actually happened 20 years earlier, but, or 10 years earlier, whatever it might be. But it's just, they were just living in the old world. Everybody's kind of still living in the past. And some people are still living in 1945. Other people are living in the 1990s. It depends on what you're talking about.
We're going to have minds break across the West. I also feel like maybe it's a little bit different in today's time, because it seems like the newer generation, or our generation now, we have kind of fostered this ideological thinking and emotional thinking, and we don't really foster critical thinking or stoicism anymore amongst the population. So you're ingrained in your beliefs, and you don't change it. You don't think critically
you choose
about
your
things
ideological
anymore.
tribe, and you stick to it,
Right,
rather than working on developing a sober assessment of reality.
Right, exactly. And I find that really a real shame. I think that's something that is critical to teach everybody, to learn how not to tie your identity to certain beliefs, and to be able to be open, and to watch the world evolve and constantly take things in and learn. But it seems like our education system and everything has done the opposite. Like, don't think critically,
Well, they call it critical thinking, but critical thinking is having a certain set of beliefs.
Right. You subscribe to this team. These are your beliefs, and you stake on it, and then your whole identity forms around it, and so it makes it very difficult.
Any challenge to that set of beliefs is a challenge to your identity, and then you fight it tooth and nail, and you won't listen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you got to learn there are. We have beliefs. That's part of being human. We're not just computers. And in fact, we have to make our commitments and decide, what's good and what's true. And but then there are all kinds of factual questions out there that are separate from that. And we should be able to, all of us, to step back and say, like, I may want this to be true, like talking about, people maybe hate Russia, and you have a right to hate Russia, maybe if you're a Western Ukrainian. I think it's very unfortunate, but okay, that's true. But then you also have to say, okay, you hate Russia. That's part of who you are. You decided that. I think that's quite unfortunate, but that's who you are. But you also need to be realistic, right? You got to step back and look at, what's actually taking place on the battlefield. What's the balance of forces here? What do you really have a chance for success? And it seems like none of them can do that. I mean, when you're just in the grips of an ideology, you stop thinking. You should say, okay, I have my commitments, but I need to also be sober and just be realistic. And the failure to be realistic in the end is extremely detrimental to your cause. And that's just what you see, it seems like, throughout the West. I just picked on Western Ukraine, but we could talk about the whole West. It's just that, we wedded ourselves to a certain ideology, and then therefore we have a certain narrative, and then certain facts that don't fit into it are suppressed. Just outright suppressed. And then, and other fictions are magnified. And it's just like, we developed this, you're talking about individual personality, it's true, but then there's this larger collective personality of the West that has gone down this route. And I think in the end, it's going to be to, I don't know if I should say the destruction, but, it's greatly to the detriment of the West.
Do you think this was intentional to make people, kind of compliant?
I guess I know they're okay. Let's say there are people who always kind of assume, go to the conspiracy theory and the who see intention behind everything. And I admit that sometimes, there are conspiracies. No question about it. I think, for example, there clearly are, groups that have worked to change our perception of Israel, and that was intentional. But there also were, the grassroots movements like Christian Zionism that actually rose separate from that. So anyway, that's just one example. I mean, sometimes there are conspiracies. There's no question about it. I guess I tend to go. I see there's an awful lot of incompetence and foolishness in the world, and people can be very intelligent, but they can also be very, very deluded, and sometimes the most intelligent people are the most deluded. I think that this, in the end, it's not actually to the benefit even of our leaders. It definitely isn't. I think in the end, it's actually, it may be to the short-term benefit of like certain corporations or politicians in a particular election, that kind of thing. But in the long run, it's actually very much to their detriment. I mean, this whole ideology, this whole way of thinking or lack of thinking has actually harmed us grievously. But it's something that has, it's just kind of risen out of our own weakness and our own foolishness. I know I'm speaking in very vague terms, but I think it's important to realize that humans are very imperfect creatures, and it's a mistake to think that the people at the top are somehow, completely in charge of everything that they do, that they really understand what's going on and they're kind of like pulling the strings. No, they're very imperfect creatures, and they get deluded, and they just, they go down these in the end, just extremely, they become slaves of ideologies. They're not above it, let's put it this way. I think in the end, it's like the ideology develops as a result of all kinds of vanity and foolishness and short-sightedness on the part of humans, and that exist among us. But that ideology in the end ends up ruling us, and it's not that we're really in charge.
Right.
I mean, speaking clearly, at a very metaphysical level, but I think it's really very true.
Right. I agree. I mean, and clearly it's obviously destructive in the long term, but I can see how it's just intentional in the short term. I mean, that's how our political system works. We want to tie people to these narratives, get them fired up, and we don't want people to think about things too closely. And so it's just this constant short-term gain type of decision-making that we do. It seems like we're not capable of looking more than a couple days ahead in the future. I mean, you just look at our campaigns, hear the political system. I mean, it's just like, I feel like my 3-year-old can think further in the future than what's happening in this country. So I don't know. I think it's,
that's all very true. One thing is like whatever, when you say whatever ideological system comes into place, I don't think they're actually, we won't go down that path again, but whatever ideological system is in place and whatever policies, however foolish, you always get people that just see a way to make a buck out of it or to advance their careers or whatever. They're not really thinking beyond that, but they just work with what they have. And that's, so you get these very, very short-sighted policies and statements and speeches and whatever. Just one example is just everybody's trying to outdo everybody else, in their devotion to Israel. And not one of them is actually stopping and thinking about, is this good for the U.S.? But it's just like they know that that's the game, and they play the game.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, maybe it's not. It's intentional, but not the stated. It's not the goal is to destroy and have people become these ideological robots or whatever. But
no, I don't believe that.
Yeah. It makes me okay. Well. I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but it just makes me question the whole system, of just democracy and how it's just been corrupted and perverted over time. And maybe with modern technology, the system doesn't work anymore. We need to think of something else. Because we talk about how great democracy is, but it seems like in all the democratic countries that are prosperous in Europe, they're failing. They're very unpopular. Where people like Putin is incredibly popular. People think that's BS, but it's true. He's clearly, there's And I lived in China for 10 years. Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping. These are popular leaders because people in their country know that their country's going the right direction. It's just okay. We won't go down this road because I want to talk to you about how to. We won't talk about what's the best form of governance now. That's too big.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan. Well, let's end it here then. Have a great weekend, and thanks for the discussion.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.